So I'm here at first to talk a little bit about one of the programs that we hold at USU's um, uh, Botanical Center in Kaysville every couple of years. And we used to call it the Sustainable Grazing Institute, but we found out that later on that institutes have to be a formal unit of the university. And so we've changed it to the Utah Sustainable Grazing Workshop. And I'm not super thrilled about the word workshop at the end. It works for now, but if anybody has any good ideas for a different name like invitational or something to that effect, please drop them into the chat. I'd love to get your ideas. So I want to talk to you a little bit about this. For maybe about 6 years now, we've had this event, but we didn't have anywhere in northern Utah to host it. And so I actually went out and got a grant to be able to build a facility for all of you folks out there to be able to participate in something like this. Prior to building this facility, we actually usually hosted it in central Utah or southern Utah. There's a research farm down in Ephraim where a colleague of mine, Matt Palmer, would host it. And he and his farm manager actually planted some really nice pasture mixes with legumes mixed in. And they were able to graze 16 900-pound steers for about 6 months on 6 acres using this management intensive grazing practice. And so we didn't necessarily want to take up that much space at the Kaysville Botanical Center. And so you have a better idea of where I'm talking about. If you're driving along I-15 northbound and you're getting to that Kaysville area, you'll see where they put in that big building. That's actually a riding arena, and our plots are just to the north of that. We've got several different types of fencing, 10 different pasture mixes were planted. And then if you look to the right of my screen right here, let me see if I can pull up the laser pointer. Right here, this is where we actually do an annual forage that's fenced in. Here we've got a dryland pasture, and here is irrigated. And it all looks a little dry in that picture right there, but that's because they were building that big facility, and all of this persisted just fine without a year of irrigation. So that just goes to show that you can really build some good soil if you follow these practices and root material. So this event is a 2-day event. It used to be a 3-day event. We found that we could probably squish it into 2 days if we do 2 tracks. So this year we're going to be doing the beginner track, and that will always be held in Kaysville every other year. And then we're going to do an intermediate track somewhere else in the state, probably Ephraim, maybe somewhere else. But the main objectives of this are to teach pasture management through a grass-centric lens, talk about designing your pasture for sustainability, and then herd management for that rotational or management intensive grazing. And then obviously there's always troubleshooting with any agricultural process that you have, and we talk a lot about those things. So what does centralized in grass production, or that grass production lens, actually mean? When you are grazing animals, you are growing a product aside just from growing animals. The animals are the benefit that you get, but you're really growing grass or forages. And so the way we teach grazing will hopefully allow participants to improve their overall grass productivity by developing strong, healthy grass plants. And really, the animals are just taking the place of hay equipment that a grass hay farmer would be using. And then also, one of the nice things about transitioning more to a rotational system is you're really providing refugia for all of the wildlife and insects that are utilizing that area as well. And so you tend to have a little bit more ecosystem services with this type of system. And so we'll go into all of those things in this 2-day workshop. Now, you may be going, well, how do I register? On all of the slides coming up from this point on, there's that QR code on the slide, and that gives you the option to register right now if you wish. We'll be holding it in June, and I'll give you a few more details towards the end of this presentation. But you can follow that QR code to the registration link from any of these slides if you decide you want to pull the trigger on this. So pasture design. When we talk pasture design, participants will actually be able to consider the different options when building grazing cells, both the permanent structures and permanent fencing that'll go in place. Because like I said earlier, I have a lot of different types of fence that you can see in action. But also, participants will be able to focus on learning how to move electric fence and transitioning animals from one paddock to the next. We'll also teach folks how to troubleshoot problems with the electric fence. We intentionally sabotage your electric fencing, what you've been doing with your electric fences, in order to help you gain experience troubleshooting when something goes wrong. How do I get it fixed? And then you'll also gain skills for measuring available forage. We show 3 methods for measuring forage. One is the clipping method, where you actually measure and calculate what's available on site. We also teach you how to use a grazing stick, which is a bit of a quicker hack, and you take you home your own grazing stick. And then we'll teach how to use a rising plate meter, which is also a pretty good way to estimate, but the tool itself is a lot more expensive. Herd management. So you'll gain, we actually will separate out participants into groups of 5, and you'll be in charge of your own set of animals on site. And we use 4 species for this. Generally, we have cattle, sheep, goats, and then we toss another species in. In the past, we've used alpacas, but we've also used horses or some other things. We're going to talk about how you go about moving the water troughs to be able to make sure that each time you move your animals, there's water available and we're not destroying the pasture at the same time. And then a little bit about harvest efficiency, and a little bit about how much your animals will eat every day. That way you know, well, if I've estimated the amount of grass in this paddock, I'm going to know that it's going to feed this many animals for a day or this many days. And so then you know, based off of that stocking rate and the available forage, how often you need to move them. We'll also talk about, what do you do outside of the grazing window, the grazing season, like winter? How do we manage our animals then? And then lastly, when it comes to troubleshooting, one thing that people don't realize is when we do transition to more of a management intensive grazing, we can get higher loads of parasites. And so we really need to be thinking about how we're treating the animals, as well as developing refugia so that we don't have drug resistance. We talk a little bit about pathogens that you find in the pasture, toxicity like bloat, nitrate accumulation, and a few of those other things. And then obviously you need to be able to pencil out, does this make me money, or am I tossing money into a failing enterprise? And so those are really the things that we focus on this beginner track. On the intermediate track, we'll focus a little bit more on, which will be next year, not this year. We'll focus a little bit more on the animal health, and then herd management for calving, lambing, kidding, those kinds of things, as well as just more advanced grazing techniques. So more details about our 2024 event. It will be in Kaysville, like I said. We've tentatively scheduled it for the 4th and 5th of June. Registration is required, and it generally will go from about 9 to 5, both of those days, and then we'll have a dinner afterward. So I really have a lot of fun with the meals that we prepare for you guys, because especially during the dinner, we like to make it a learning experience. Traditionally, we've gone out and bought, 30 pounds ish of ribeyes, 5 pounds of different types of finishing. So we'll actually take grass finished beef versus grain finished beef, versus how they score, um, according to the USDA's metrics. So select beef, choice beef, prime beef, and then we play a little bit with genetics of those ribeyes. So is it Wagyu or is it Angus? And then you get to blind taste test. We'd like to do a few other activities like that so that livestock producers can get a real idea for the products that they'd be sending out, depending on the niche that they pick for their livestock production. I'd really like to try some of the smaller breeds beef, or just compare species comparisons with the loins at the dinner this year. So it should be a lot of fun. If anybody has any ideas of what would be a fun taste test activity, please drop them in. I will definitely read them. But one of the pitfalls with this event is that we only have limited availability, and that comes down to the quality of the content being presented. You're going to be getting your hands dirty. I know Grant likes to bring down his soil probe truck and get a nice deep probe of the soil so you can see all the different things going on in there. And you really can't do those types of activities of moving animals around, looking at soil, practicing some irrigation if you've got a lot of people. So I suggest, if this is something you want to pull the trigger on, you register as early as possible, because once we do start advertising it, it does fill up fast. I just opened up the registration link this morning, and so you all are the first people that are going to have a crack at it. So with that said, that should cover this presentation. Maybe I can take a couple of questions if there were any, before we transition.
Links posted relevant to your presentation, Cody, that are important there. The link to the registration that you talked about, you've got a QR code, I know, but there's a actual active link on there on the chat. And then Dr. Curtis, one of our specialists, put a link in there for extension online courses for evaluating the profitability of farming, and one on new and beginning farmers. So there's some things there that are related to the presentations made.